Okay, inshallah. Again, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We would like to welcome you on behalf of Cafe Ala Fikr and the Islamic Association of West Virginia. This is a joint collaboration. First, we will invite the Imam to kick off the meeting with a verse from the Quran. It's a typical tradition of a Cafe Ala Fikr format.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأوفوا بعهد الله إذا عاهدتم ولا تنقضوا الأيمان بعد توكيدها وقد جعلتم الله عليكم كفيلا إن الله يعلم ما تفعلون.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for coming this evening. It's always a pleasure to see such a wonderful crowd. I know it's a Saturday evening and you would rather do something else, but you still decide to come and be with us, so we do greatly appreciate that. This is, many of our members have expressed interest in a workshop on knowing your rights as citizens. And so this has been in the making for quite some time. And fortunately, at one of our cafe forums, Nahla from another congregation came to us and said, do you know that we do have a ACLU chapter here in West Virginia, and we do offer a workshop titled Know Your Rights? So we were pleasantly surprised, and we thank Nahla Lewis for pointing that to us, and thank you for coming. We greatly appreciate that. As I stated earlier, we start the forum with an ayah, a verse from the Quran, and we try to bring a relative meaning to it that is relative to the subject that we will be discussing tonight. So I'd like to focus on the first part. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. And most importantly, the English translation, obviously, indeed Allah orders justice and good conduct and giving to relatives and forbids immorality and bad conduct and oppression. This has been considered the most comprehensive ayah verse in the Quran because it touches a wide range of Islamic teachings that is condensed only in few words. I'd like to focus on one of the three parts that Allah commands and one on three parts that Allah God Almighty forbids. So the first three that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, commands of us is do justice, be good, and give relatives their due. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, He forbids three things: shameful acts, evil deeds, aggression, and transgression. So the two focus points is justice, aggression, or transgression. And I'm going to throw it out to you. How do you define justice? And you can freely shout it out if you would like.
Fairness.
Say that again?
Fairness.
Fairness. How do you define justice?
Treating people equally.
Say it again.
Treating people equally.
Treating people equally.
Keeping the balance.
Keeping the balance. Tell me more about keeping the balance.
Basically, the opposite of justice is injustice or oppression, which is exceeding the limit of something. But keeping things on equal terms is the definition of justice, basically.
Good. Anyone else?
Benefit over harm.
Benefit over harm.
Having our legal rights.
Having your legal rights. So it means, it has different meanings to many of us. And we like to think of simple terms. Every single answer that you've given is the right answer. But in simple terms, it's equal. That's what it comes down to. It becomes to equality. And there's a debate, on further discussion of justice and equality. But equal, really, what simply in simple terms, what it comes down to. So when we think of aggression or transgression, what do you think of? How do you define that? And don't tell me it's the opposite of justice. Just articulate what does it mean to you when you think of aggression or transgression.
Denying people's rights.
Denying people's rights.
To be unfair.
I'm sorry?
To be unfair.
To be unfair.
نصرة القوي على الضعيف.
نصرة القوي على الضعيف. You want to translate that?
Support the stronger.
So support the strong against the weak.
Violating the rights of others.
Violating the rights of others. In simple terms, and every single one is correct. And again, it means differently to other people. But in simple terms, it's crossing the line.
Crossing the red zone, the red line.
I'm not going there. But it's crossing. But it is truly crossing the line. That's when you know that you are on the verge, or if you are really in the aggression, transgression territory. So how do we know that we are being just? How do we know that we are being treated justly? Or how do we know that we are being treated unjustly? And in order for us to understand that, we have to understand our legal rights. What are they? And to help us understand our legal rights, so we'll know whether we are being just or unjust, is Miss Jamie Crofts. She is the legal director of ACLU. And she is, I liked her bio because it is very intriguing to me. So she graduated cum laude from Northwestern University School of Law in Chicago. She grew up in Illinois, relocated to Charleston, wild, wonderful West Virginia in 2013 to clerk for Judge Joseph Goodwin, at that time district judge for Southern District of West Virginia. While in law school, Jamie worked as a student attorney for Northwestern Center for International Human Rights, where she worked on appeals and habeas corpus cases for death row inmates in the United States and in Malawi. Am I pronouncing that correctly? What took you to Africa, I don't know, but that's very noble. And MacArthur Justice Center, where she participated in civil rights litigation and lobbying. So prior to law school, she worked for several years as a paralegal at a boutique litigation law firm and lived in France for 1 year teaching English. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Jamie Crofts, and please give her a good welcome.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here tonight. And I just want to say before I start, this doesn't need to be incredibly formal. If you have any questions while I'm speaking, please just raise your hand or get my attention. And if I start speaking in too many legal words, I apologize, and just stop me and tell me that you need me to speak in normal English. Because I apologize, I sometimes speak lawyer speak accidentally. So I'm going to go over all of your rights when you encounter law enforcement. Almost everything that I say applies everywhere in the United States. There are a couple of things specific to driving that are specific to West Virginia. Otherwise, this covers your rights when you're encountering law enforcement anywhere in the U.S. So just a couple disclaimers here at the beginning. This is not legal advice, it's a public education event. And above all else, always make sure that you do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel safe. In a specific situation, if you don't feel safe asserting your rights, even though those are your rights, keep yourself safe. That is always the most important thing. I also like to just touch on racial profiling at the beginning of these events. Racial profiling is completely illegal by law enforcement, but it does still happen in the United States. For example, black students are suspended at school 3 times more frequently than white students, and students who are suspended or expelled are 3 times more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system in the following year. Here in West Virginia, African American youth make up less than 5% of the state's population, but are 14% of the youth confined in juvenile institutions. Non-white youth are less than 6% of the state's population, but comprise over 22% of youth confined for technical violations of probation. And then another ACLU study in Minneapolis found that black people were 8.7 times more likely, and Native Americans were 8.6 times more likely to be arrested for low-level offenses than white people. And that included things that were completely subjective, like loitering, and selectively enforced by police. So I'm going to go over 4 different types of police encounters here: a stop on the street, a traffic stop, a search of your home, and an arrest and interrogation. What I'm saying applies to your encounters with all types of law enforcement officers. That can be city, county, state, or federal law enforcement officers like Homeland Security, FBI, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So remember that you always have the right to ask an officer for identifying information. You always have the right to remain silent, except for 2 specific situations, which we'll get into shortly. And you can always politely ask if you're free to go if you're not clearly being detained. So this is Lou. We use Lou as our example. He lives here in West Virginia and unfortunately encounters the police quite frequently. If Lou is just walking down the street and an officer stops him and asks him for his name, asks him what he's doing, asks him to see an identification, he might be wondering, what do I do? What do I need to tell the officer? In this situation, you generally do not have to answer any of those questions. That doesn't mean that you always have to refuse to give your name. If you feel comfortable giving your name or identification, then that is completely up to you. But you don't have to if you don't want to. The magic words are, am I free to leave? In West Virginia, you do not have to show identification if you're just on the street, unless the officer says that they're investigating a crime and they need your name for the purpose of that investigation. Other than that, you do not have to show ID in West Virginia if you're just walking on the street. So that is the first exception to your right to remain silent, is in that specific situation. Never run. Running is never a good idea, and it may give the officers reason to search you or stop you when they did not have reason to do so before. So if Lou says, officer, I understand that you're just doing your job, but am I free to leave? The officer should leave Lou alone if he doesn't have any reason to believe that he's doing something illegal. If the officer says no when you ask if you're free to leave, that means you're being detained. And an officer can detain you for a reasonable period of time, but only if he or she has a reasonable suspicion that you're engaged in criminal activity. You still have the right to remain silent at this point. Officers can stop you and pat you down. It's called stop and frisk. Don't resist if this happens. An officer can feel the outside of your clothing if he has reasonable suspicion that you're committing a crime. However, this does not mean that you have to consent to the officer reaching into your pockets or searching any of your belongings, such as a bag or a purse. An officer does not have the right to reach into your clothing or go into any of your belongings unless they feel something when they're patting the outside of your clothing that they can tell is contraband. And generally, contraband means a weapon or drugs. And you still, at this point, have the right to refuse a full search.
We hear a lot in the sense that people like to be silent. What is the advantage, disadvantage either to talk or to not to talk?
So in these types of situations, it really can vary. Later when I talk about in an interrogation situation, I would recommend never speaking unless you have an attorney. Because and they say anything you say can and will be held against you, and they mean it. I've personally worked on some wrongful convictions cases where people said things that were completely innocent because they were innocent of the crimes, but those statements ended up being used against them in a way where the officer tried to say that it corroborated a specific timeline of events. If you're just stopped on the street and an officer says, "Hi, what's your name? What are you doing here?" and you feel comfortable answering that information, I would encourage you to answer in that situation. However, I just think that you should also know that you don't have to. If you feel that you're being stopped for an improper purpose, then that might be a time to assert your right to remain silent. Does that answer your question?
Follow-up question.
Yes.
So, walking down the street, he stopped you. What are you doing? How you doing? And he said, "I'm just taking a walk." And then he asks to search you, or he wants to frisk you. So he has the right to do that.
He has the right to frisk you if he has a reason to believe you're committing a crime. Otherwise, the officer does not have any right to search you or frisk you whatsoever. And you can always, no matter whether it's in your car, your home, or on your person, if an officer asks, "Can I search you? Can I search your car?" you always have the right to say no. You never have to consent to a search. And I think that if that is one of only two things you remember tonight, I think that that's incredibly important to remember.
So follow up on that. Sorry, Shay. So follow up on that. I don't know what's in his mind. Because I could be a victim of circumstances where I fit the description of someone who committed the crime or maybe a suspect, and I just happen to be in the area, so I don't know he thinks I'm a suspect. So I say, "Well, no, I don't want you to search me," or it's within my rights. Then what happens? In his mind, I need the description of that suspect.
If the officer, in that situation, the officer would probably have the right to ask you for your identification to get your name for the purpose of that investigation, but still would not have the reasonable suspicion or probable cause required to actually search you.
But he has the right to take you down to the station to continue his...
If he has reason to believe that you're committing a crime, yes.
So does he have to explain why he was going to search you, or he doesn't have to explain?
Because
Because how would I know that he's interested? He's not just harassing you.
right. And I personally would never consent to any type of search because if it is for the purposes of a valid law enforcement investigation and they have probable cause, then they can go and get a warrant. I honestly don't really see any upside to ever consenting to a search, frankly.
Without a warrant.
Without a warrant, yes.
What if you're in a store?
In a store, it would depend if there's, private security versus the police. I can't really speak to what private security might do, but this generally, your rights are the same on the street as in all public places. This first part applies to.
But ideally, things don't really work like that, okay? Because reality is, if he has something in mind, or even if it's racial profiling, and he has something against you, whether because you're dark skinned, you're black, you're a woman wearing hijab, whatever, he is going to pursue that, and he can say he has a suspicion, and he can continue his search and his harassment, so to speak, or his investigation.
Unfortunately, things like that do happen, and you could be detained or interrogated for completely wrong reasons, and frankly, that's illegal. But it does happen, and it's a sad reality that we live in still. But if these rights are violated, even though you may not be able to, it may not help you in that exact moment. In the future, there are other things you can do later to try to either be compensated for how you've been wronged, or to just try to stop that practice from happening in the future.
Are you within your rights to ask the reason?
Question here to come.
Is one within their rights to ask the reason? For example, you had said, if the officer believes there's a reasonable suspicion or something like this. And so, if they start this process, does one have the right to say, why are you stopping me, and what is the reason? Like,
oh yes, you always have the right to ask why you're being stopped, what the reason is the officer would like to search you. They may not answer, and especially in the situation of why they want to search you. But in that situation, I would just say, I don't consent to a search, but...
So that's the same as me believing that it's not reasonable to be searched at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the questions. I like when we get to interact a little bit. Okay, so if you're arrested, don't panic, don't resist, and don't talk back. And we will get back to that later. So just keeping yourself safe. Always remain calm, polite, and respectful. Verbally assert your rights, but don't physically resist. Don't touch the police. Don't attempt to run. And always keep your hands in full view of the police at all times. If, for example, I'm pulled over and asked for an ID, I will actually tell the officer what I'm doing. I will say, okay, to get my ID out, I need to go into my purse to get my wallet. So that way they know that you're not reaching for a weapon. It's just kind of a good safety tip.
Jamie, this is a very good point, especially for our community, because we use our hands a lot. And the police officer could take it as a different sign, So, it says, do not physically resist the police officer. He could probably take it like if you're using your hand, like I do, as like, okay, you distracted me, and I'll probably get arrested anyway. So, be sure your hands, remain calm with that.
Yeah, it's definitely always good to be aware of what you're doing with your hands. That way you're not making the officers uncomfortable, and they don't have reason to think that you're trying to hurt them. So we're going now into a traffic stop if you're driving. Again, if the officer asks if he can search the car, you generally do not have to consent. So getting pulled over, an officer can pull you over while driving if they have a reasonable suspicion that you committed a crime or a traffic violation. I like to say if an officer follows anyone around long enough, they will be able to come up with a legal reason to pull them over. Even if that violation is something very minor, like not turning on your turn signal as far in front of the intersection as you're supposed to. Yes?
Yeah, I feel the word reasonable is vague and loose, and it's always up to the discretion of the officer to say if it's reasonable or not. So what is the limit for that?
Well, so they will have to justify themselves if they write you a citation. because you do have a right to defend yourself in court. So if you are written a citation for anything, you do have the chance to assert your rights and whether or not the stop was reasonable at that point. Unfortunately, they use words like reasonable that are a little bit wishy-washy intentionally. And a lot of times the courts have to decide whether or not a specific stop was reasonable. Honestly, a lot of times courts just side with the officers, rightly or wrongly.
And what happens if something is taken to court and it's your word against the word of the officer, and there's an impression that they always believe the officer and not the other party?
Unfortunately, that can happen a lot, particularly in situations with driving violations. That's kind of an unfortunate reality.
Everything is recorded now. I mean, so the police guard has a camera. The police officers also have a camera on their chest. But sometimes they do turn it off, but everything is recorded right now. And if that's not been recorded, someone else is recording something, as we have found out from...
Yes, and that is helpful. I know that the Charleston Police Department is working on getting body cameras so that all of their officers in the field will eventually have body cameras, and they do have cameras in all of their squad cars. And the state police do as well.
You got a question?
You said that typically that police officers can follow you around long enough to find something. My question is there a time limit that they can follow you around before it's considered harassing and stalking?
There is, and unfortunately, again, there's not an actual set period of time. It's really, again, a court would look...
The reason why I ask, because not just police, but anybody can follow anybody long enough, and that person's going to start to feel uncomfortable,
right,
and nervous. And I mean, and you know, as good as some cops are, you have others with bad intentions. So you know, I got a cop following around me for 6 or 7 blocks.
And if you ever do feel that you're being, followed by a particular officer or harassed by the local or state police, I know that is something that the FBI will actually investigate, like local law enforcement, if they're harassing people or racially profiling. So that might be a situation where law enforcement can actually help investigate other law enforcement.
Follow up. So if that happens, and let's say 1 minute went by and you're driving and you feel, but sometimes it's dark and you didn't realize it could be an undercover car, whatever the case may be. Is there a number that you can call as you're driving and said, look, there's a car behind me, I think it's a police officer, I'm not sure. Is there a number that you can call just to report your concern, just in case something happens, or is this completely unnecessary?
If you're very worried in a specific situation, I would honestly recommend calling 911. If there is a specific situation where you feel threatened or are afraid that you're being followed, and they could hopefully help you and help you figure out whether or not it's legitimate. Also, if you're ever pulled over late at night in a dark area and you feel unsafe, you can turn on your flashers and brake to acknowledge that you realize that you're being pulled over, but slowly continue until you're in a lit or more populated area. That is acceptable to do. Just make sure that you turn on your flashers and brake and kind of indicate to the officer that you realize you're being pulled over and you're not attempting to flee. So upon request, if the officer asks if you are the driver, you should give the officer your driver's license, insurance information, and registration. And this is the second exception to your right to remain silent. So for everything else we go over tonight, you always have the right to remain silent. And then once you've shown your license, registration, and proof of insurance, you can maintain your right to remain silent. If an officer pulls you over for speeding and asks if you know how fast you were going, you don't have to answer that question. So if the officer asks if he can search your car and you just say, I do not consent to a search, am I free to leave? If the officer does not have reasonable suspicion that you're committing a crime, you should be able to leave at that point. So for cars, officers do not need a warrant, but they do need probable cause to believe that the car will contain evidence of a crime. And probable cause is a higher standard than this reasonable suspicion we've been talking about. And if there's anything illegal that's in plain sight when you're stopped, the officer can seize that as well. So if you're stopped for a traffic stop, you do not have to consent to a search. Don't make incriminating statements. Don't exit your car unless the officer asks you to. Don't hide your hands or make sudden movements, and never lie. So what to do? Give your license, registration, and insurance. Exercise your right to remain silent. You can ask for the officer's name, number, or badge information. And if you're asked to step out of the car, step out of the car, but close and lock the door behind you because that indicates that you do not consent to any type of search of your car. So for breathalyzer and sobriety tests, you do not have to submit to the field sobriety tests, so things like standing on one leg while you touch your nose. You do not have to do those. But if you refuse that, you will have to take a breathalyzer. But if you're pulled over and an officer asks you to do field sobriety tests and you prefer to take the breathalyzer, you can do that. You don't have to try to recite the alphabet backwards if you don't want to. And the officer can choose which test to give you, either a blood or a urine test or chemical test. But if the officer chooses a blood test, you can refuse that and take a breath or urine test instead. And that's just because it's so invasive to actually draw blood. So keeping yourself safe, find a safe place to stop your car, park it, and turn off the ignition. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. I said earlier, don't reach for anything without telling the officer what you're doing. If you're stopped at night, turn on the car's interior lights, and always remain polite, calm, and respectful. Searches of your home or apartment or condo or wherever you live. If an officer knocks on your door, you can actually ask through the door if the officer has a warrant. And if the answer is no, you do not have to let the officer in or say anything other than, "Officer, I know you're just doing your job, but I do not want to talk to you right now, and I respectfully ask that you leave my property." At that point, without a warrant, the officer should leave. If he says he has a warrant, you can ask to see it through the peephole or under the door, or you can step outside and close the door behind you to see the warrant. I always, again, recommend closing the door behind you just to further indicate that you do not consent to any type of search. So every warrant has to have these things. Every warrant has to be signed by a judge with the judge's name, describe what the police are looking for, say who is being searched, the place that is being searched, and the name of the agency doing the search. If a warrant doesn't have any of these things, it's invalid. So there are both search warrants and arrest warrants that do different things. A search warrant does not give the officer the power to arrest you, but the officer can arrest you if he finds evidence of a crime during the search. An arrest warrant gives the officer the power to arrest you, but not the power to search, except that the officer can search the area within your control or grabbing area, which the Supreme Court actually said at one point was your lunging area. If an officer came in right now, he could search the podium because it's within my lunging reach. And if they have an arrest warrant for you, they can search for you in places where they know you might be hiding. An officer can arrest you if he has a valid arrest warrant, if he witnessed you commit a crime, or if he has probable cause to believe that you committed a crime. If you're arrested, don't panic, don't resist, and don't talk back.
So going back to the probable cause that you committed a crime, so that would mean you could fit the description of someone who committed a crime that's probable cause?
No, it would have to be more than that. There would have to be something actually linking you specifically, not just your description to a particular crime. Yes. Let's see. So, I mean, if for example, the police knew that a 5'4" blonde woman robbed the 7-Eleven, but they have no evidence connecting me to being near that 7-Eleven, to having any of the things that were stolen, then they do not have the right to arrest me based on that alone. There has to be something more.
Thank you.
Yes?
You said do not resist. If you have a search warrant only, and they really want to arrest me, should I resist or not?
No, never physically resist. Honestly, nothing good can come of it. So if you're arrested, the officers have to read you your Miranda rights, which you've probably heard on TV or in movies. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. These have to be said to you before you're arrested. But be careful, because if you're just talking to an officer and they're not interrogating you, and it doesn't matter that they haven't read you your Miranda rights yet, they can still use anything that you've said in that situation. They only have to read you your Miranda rights when you're being arrested or before you're interrogated. Remember, you never have to say anything. So I think my two main points that I would like everyone to remember is you never have to consent to a search, and you never have to say anything except for those two situations that I described. So there are a lot of ways that police can try to get people to speak during an interrogation. They might try to say that you're only refusing to talk because you're guilty. Don't take the bait, remain quiet. A lot of innocent people have gone to jail because they either falsely confessed or said something under the pressure of the interrogation that wasn't true. This happens a lot more frequently than anyone realizes. Everyone thinks, oh, I would never falsely confess to a crime, but it happens all the time. And there are a number of ways that officers get this to happen. Also, I think it's important to know, that officers can lie. And lying, they not just are allowed to lie. Lying is a very common interrogation technique. That is how officers frankly get a lot of confessions, is by lying to the suspects. So I think that's just something to always be conscious and aware of if you're in the situation where you're answering questions for the police. So cell phones. If you're arrested, the officers will take your cell phone, but they do need a warrant before they can search it. If they ask you for your passcode, you do not have to give it to them. And if you do give it to them, that's seen as consent to search your phone. So do not give your passcode unless you consent to the officers searching your phone and everything in it. It's possible that for police purposes, this is an issue that hasn't been decided by the courts yet, that officers maybe can ask you to use your fingerprint, but you do not have to give them your passcode. Honestly, I think that eventually the Supreme Court will say, no, you can't make people use their fingerprint either, but they haven't said it yet. So that's just something to be aware of. And again, I would never consent to a search of my cell phone.
Jamie, before you go to the next point, okay, cell phones. So that applies to any device, laptop, iPad.
Yes.
Okay, so this scenario is if you got stopped or if you are, experience anything with a police encounter. What if you're traveling? You're traveling domestically or internationally, and again, they ask you to be searched or frisked, and they say, okay, hand over your cell phone, and they want to access it. You're at the airport, and they have you in a small room. What are your rights then?
You still do not have to consent to a search of the data on your phone. When you're traveling, you do have fewer privacy rights in that your person and your luggage and all of that can be searched. But that is just for security purposes. And there is no reason that an officer at an airport would need to see the contents of your cell phone. And I would absolutely not recommend consenting to a search in that situation. This was the slide that I thought was after the other one. Police officers can lie. They can tell you there are witnesses against you. They can tell you that they know it was either you or your brother, and if you don't confess, they're going to arrest your brother. These are things that happen all the time. If you're arrested, immediately ask for an attorney and say that you will not speak to anyone until you have your lawyer there. If you don't get a lawyer after saying this, keep asking for one. If you can't afford an attorney, you have the right to have one appointed for you.
How long can they hold you without allowing you to speak with your lawyer?
I believe in West Virginia, it's supposed to be 24 hours. Oh no, that's not true actually. It's the reasonableness standard. And so it really is going to depend a lot on the specifics. If it's the weekend and they can't get in touch with your attorney, that's different than if your attorney is there and trying to get in to see you. But if you ask for an attorney clearly and say that you will not answer questions without one, they cannot question you anymore. So even if you are still being held, they cannot continue to question you at that point. When you're asking for a lawyer, always be very, very clear about it. Say, I want a lawyer and I'm not answering any questions. There have actually been cases that went up to the Supreme Court where they analyzed people saying things like, should I get a lawyer? A lawyer would be nice. Do I need a lawyer? I think I want to talk to someone. And the Supreme Court has said that's not sufficient. You have to be very clear and unequivocal in what you're saying. Inside the police stationing, once you ask for a lawyer, they have to stop questioning you and just maintain your right to remain silent at that point. Getting angry and agitated never helps anyone. And you should be allowed to make a phone call within, again, I'm sorry, a reasonable amount of time after being arrested. Special considerations for non-citizens. So I just have a short video that I'd like to play.
Is it going to be hard to find this place?
I didn't catch that.
No, I've got the newest phone. It'll be a piece of cake, actually.
Okay, I'll call the nearest cheesecake factory.
What? No. Oh, no. This cannot be happening.
Recalculating route 2. Escape from police.
Would you turn that thing off? Stay calm.
But I don't have any immigration papers. What if the police ask me about that?
Recalculating route 2. Jail.
Relax. Okay, you have rights that can protect you whether you have full legal status or not.
Okay, so what do I do?
Depart car and continue route on foot.
Don't listen to Siri. Remain calm. Show your license, registration, proof of insurance. You always have the right to remain silent, and you don't have to answer questions about your immigration status, where you were born, or how you got to this country.
So if the police ask me that directly, I really don't have to answer those questions at all?
Absolutely not. If you have immigration papers, you're required to show them if a federal immigration agent asks for them. But if you don't have them and any law enforcement officer asks, you can just tell him you're choosing to remain silent and keep quiet.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, don't lie and say you have status when you don't.
Searching Google for forged documents.
What?
Why not? This is a smartphone.
Fake documents will only incriminate you. Never give any falsified documents. Your phone is dumb.
I couldn't connect with the Cheesecake Factory. Would you like me to try again?
Listen, they might ask to search you or the vehicle, but you don't have to say yes. They can only search you if they think there's evidence of a crime. And remember, Siri, even you have the right to remain silent.
Central Mall Cheesecake Factory, this is Evan.
Your focus should be on following the officer's orders. If there's no issue, you can ask if you're free to go. If you're not free to go, then you're being detained.
Okay, so what if I am being detained?
Don't resist. Say you wish to remain silent and ask to speak with a lawyer before you agree to anything. You can actually ask to speak with a lawyer at any moment during the stop.
I don't know, man. I think you should run.
Okay, stay calm, exercise my rights, no fake papers, and politely refuse to answer any questions about my immigration status. I got this. What about you?
I'm not driving, so the officer can request my name or ID, but unless the officer suspects me of a crime, as a passenger, I'm not required to give my name or show ID, or answer any other questions. I have the right to ask if I'm free to leave, and only have to stay if I'm suspected of a crime.
Lucky you.
Look, if you ever feel like your rights have been violated, just remember the details of the stop, like the officer's name and badge, what kind of questions you were asked, and how long the stop took, and then get in touch with your local ACLU.
Redirecting to AC Saloon.
No, the American Civil Liberties Union.
I'm sorry. I found no results for Pelican Sizzle Library Onion.
Can I ask a quick question? What happens when the police officer or at the borders, when you enter into the United States or whatever at airports, they don't ask you, but they ask your children a question?
And you know, where you're going, where have you been, what did you do on the vacation, or this or that?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, they can't. They do have the right to speak to children. I would, and they can even do it out of your earshot. I would request, if possible, to stay with them at all times, and ask it. If you feel uncomfortable, you can ask. If the officer would mind speaking to you instead of your child. But they do, unfortunately, at airports and at borders and points of entry to the country, officers do have the right to ask questions, particularly about your travel itinerary. That is something that they are allowed to ask about.
Are they allowed to ask about where do you go? I mean, how much time did you spend at the place you came from?
Yes.
And what reason that kept you for that long at this place?
You don't have to answer questions like that, but they can ask them. You can exercise your right to remain silent.
Children, they should not ask, right? Underage children.
They should not, in my personal opinion, but legally they can. So generally, non-citizens have the exact same rights as U.S. citizens when you're stopped or in any of these situations. There are just a couple of exceptions that I like to cover. So you always have the right to remain silent, except at border and ports of entry, in those specific situations, points of entry and airports, you can be asked information about your immigration status. Never sign to or agree to anything without speaking to a lawyer. This is even more important for non-citizens than for citizens because things can be held against you even if you are here legally. So just always make sure that all of your T's are crossed and I's are dotted before you sign anything. And if you're just being questioned about your immigration status, you don't have the right to a free attorney. But if there's a criminal investigation in addition to it, then you do have the right to an attorney for that.
Excuse me, where do you classify a permanent resident or a green card holder? Does he belong to the category of citizens or like
Non-citizens?
Non-citizens. So he has no right to a free lawyer?
Just for immigration.
Just for immigration,
For any criminal investigation, everyone is entitled to an appointed attorney, whether you're a citizen or not. So if you're 18 or older and you have valid immigration documents, I recommend keeping them on you just for your own well-being and safety. But no officer should ever stop to ask you about your immigration status. And again, unless it is an immigration officer, you do not have to answer any questions about your immigration status.
You said that they should keep immigration papers on them, but at the same time, you're saying that the only way they can be asked is at the point of entry or at the airport.
Or by an immigration official.
But just getting pulled over on the side of the street, I hear the local police can't ask for the papers.
No. And officers can never search you based on race, ethnicity, national origin, or religion, but they can search you based on your destination or travel itinerary. If you're asked for your immigration papers, and this is only if it is an immigration officer, in all other situations you do not have to provide them, ask if the request is voluntary. If it is, you can walk away. If it's not voluntary and you have valid papers, show them. And never falsely claim to be a citizen or provide fake documents. If your workplace is raided, continue your work. You have the right to remain silent. And you'll only be expected to produce documentation if you reveal that you're not a citizen. If you are in immigration detention, you do have the right to speak with your lawyer and be visited by your lawyer. You have the right to have your attorney with you at any hearings. You don't have the right to a free court-appointed attorney, but there are a number of attorneys who do these cases for free or very low cost. And so you can actually ask for a list of those attorneys. You can be detained pending an immigration case, but a lot of people are eligible for bond. You have the right to a hearing before an immigration judge. If you feel persecution or torture in your home country, tell an officer immediately and contact an attorney. And in those situations, you should be able to easily find a pro bono attorney. And if you're arrested on a criminal charge, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement can put a detainer on you and hold you, even if you're released for that. Always have a plan ready. And just know that any criminal charges can have special consequences for non-citizens that citizens do not have. If you're ever treated badly by law enforcement, take down the officer's identifying information, talk to witnesses, take pictures, take notes.
They won't let you take pictures, and they say if you take pictures, they will sue you or something.
You actually have a First Amendment right to take pictures and video of law enforcement in public spaces. And call us if you feel that you've been discriminated against. The Council on American Islamic Relations is also a wonderful organization. But if you do feel that you're being discriminated against, please, reach out. This is, I think, just kind of everything that we covered. Your safety is always most important. Don't resist. Don't talk back. You can always make a complaint or file a lawsuit later. Be cooperative, but know and assert your rights. Most officers are good people just trying to do their jobs. You don't need to give them a hard time, but remember that you have rights and you can assert them when necessary.
Wow, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jamie. I do believe that Nahla has a few words she would like to address, or is it Doug? So we do have a couple of guests. Doug Evans, who is also with the ACLU. Doug, thank you for coming. And we've had guests to come to Cafe, but we never had one from Chicago. So we understand that Jamie's best friend is visiting from Chicago, and he was kind enough to join us here. So I'm hoping that you enjoy the evening with us. So thank you for coming.
I am Nahla, for the ones of you who know me. I also have another hat that I wear. I serve on the national board of the ACLU. And I am here to ask you.
That deserves a clap, by the way.
No, the reason I brought it up is because let's use this as a model. I know you have a network of mosques and Islamic societies around the country. Please use our resources. And it's really very simple. All you have to do is go online, go to aclu.org, and there is a drop-down menu. Each state offers the same services. They all have legal staff. And a couple words, I know you're in a hurry. I just want to assure you that the American Civil Liberties Union on a national level has been a major force in defending and working on the Guantanamo Bay issue. And I feel if I was a politician, you will be my constituency, because I'm the only Arabic speaker person on a national board. So I have this duty to you all. And I'm going to ask you to seriously consider spreading the word. Just get with other imams and other Islamic associations and be sure to avail yourselves of all the national aids. And believe me, the national ACLU is, our people are very well represented on staff, and so please, I just encourage you to do that. Thank you.
And just a few things, I know you guys are in a hurry to get out. Sitting on the table over here, you can actually find some of these bust cards. And actually what these are is they're little cards that have information. Basically everything that Jamie has talked about will be in this card, and it fits in your wallet. You can fold it up. There's a couple different versions, I think, sitting out there. You can also go to our website, acluwv.org. We've got some information over there on how you can become a member of the ACLU or support our work. So if you have any questions, we'll be around, but I know you guys are in a hurry to head off. So.
Before you go, so Jamie, we do have a small token of appreciation. So we want to thank you for your time and dedication to coming and providing the workshop. So please accept this. It's a Blanco piece of glass. Oops! And you just baptized her. So again, thank you very much. So we will conclude by this. The second thing that, according, if you can give me 1 minute. The second thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, commanded of us is to be good. So regardless of the situation, thank you. If we're always good and be peaceful, that hopefully will also spill over to whoever we're dealing with. So with that, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for coming, and time to break.